Welcome to the Rest is Politics Question Time with me, Alastair Campbell.
And me, Rory Stewart.
So, Rory, let's start with Caitlin Parker. What are your views on Michel Barnier's appointment as Prime Minister of France? Is he up to the job?
And Alistair, so you know this guy really well. Can I just sort of act as the questioner and the listener here?
Yeah.
What we notice here is that Michel Barnier was associated with the right. I mean, what used to be called the Gaullist parties. He was like a parliamentary aide for various right-wing ministers. He served in various right-wing governments. So presumably, if you're from the French left, who got the most votes or most seats in the parliament out of the last election, you must be completely furious that Macron's rejected the candidate that you've produced from the left and has instead brought in somebody which would be a bit like, I don't know, the Labour Party's views if after they got most seats in parliament, suddenly somebody appointed, I don't know, Jeremy Hunt as the Prime Minister. Go on, what are they? Is that a dodgy analogy?
Well, it's just very, look, what's happened is that we've talked a lot about the snap election and we've gone through the results, which essentially have ended up with this left alliance having the most seats, but not enough to form a majority and no alliance with which to form a majority. And then the sort of out on the far right, Le Pen's party, although not doing as well as they expect to do after the first round, having a pretty sizable chunk in there. And Macron has to appoint a prime minister. That prime minister has to form a government and has to try to get a budget through very, very soon. And went through all sorts of processes, all sorts of people, and has come up with the one that he thinks might be able to command a majority. The problem, and the reason why the left are, as you rightly say, very, very angry about it, is because what they think he has done in appointing Michel Barnier is deliberately appointing somebody that he hopes Le Pen will not pull the plug on. The problem is Le Pen now, although she didn't, quotes, win the election, this has given her enormous power because the truth is she can pull the plug.
And because the left's not going to vote for Barnier, so the only way he can really operate as prime minister is with tacit support from the far right deciding not to vote against him. So presumably Macron had two choices. He could either put his centrist bloc with the left, or he could make his centrist bloc depend on the vote of the far right. Why did he decide to make his centrist bloc depend on the vote from the far right rather than making his centrist bloc go into coalition with the left?
Well, the name that the left put up, Lucy Castay, there was no way he was going to have her simply because she is, her entire shtick was about undermining the basic reforms that he's been taking through. Added to which, I think this is his attempt. I hesitate to use Theresa May's strong and stable formulation. It's an attempt to get some sort of stability. And he would argue, I think, that the other groupings would not have worked. But the reason why the left are up in arms about it is because, as you say, they don't think this reflects sufficiently the outcome of the election. Now, what Barney has to do and what he'll try and do in the next few days, and he is a very, very skillful political figure. And I do think actually his role, having held 27 European governments together, whilst up against this kind of, never-endingly changing group of people and policies on the Brexit side of negotiations, he did a pretty good job at holding those 27 together. He's a good listener. He's a detailed person. He's somebody who he has had some pretty choice things to say about Macron in the past, but he's somebody who I suspect will spend an awful lot of time sitting down for a long time with people who wouldn't necessarily consider him to be a political ally. His job is now to try to form a government. Key appointment is going to be the finance minister. Don't know who that's going to be. And again, will he go left? Will he go right? Probably try and go somewhere in the middle. But then he has to form a government. They have to get a budget through Parliament. It's going to be very, 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 very fraught. I would argue he's got one of the most difficult jobs in the world right now.
And then get the budget through the EU and deal with the fact that France has got a budget deficit much bigger than the EU allows and its rules and all sort of stuff.
Exactly.
So tell us a little bit about Michel Barnier, he ran, didn't he, at one point to be president, where he sounded like he was going quite right wing. He was making some quite sort of tough statements about immigration, and obviously he came from a right wing party initially.
I wonder whether that.
Yeah.
We remember we interviewed him for leading.
Yeah,
You weren't. You were abroad.
I was virtual, and you were with him, but we were both there. Yeah,
and
yeah.
I've got to know him reasonably well. In fact, Fiona and I had a bit of time with him at his house in France last summer, and he is pretty right wing, and I think that I think that stance on immigration that he took, I think it was twofold. I think one, that was him as he was trying to get the nomination for his party, signalling that he was going to be tough on immigration. I think it may be one of the factors that Macron weighed up in deciding to call him in. He didn't really feature much in the runners and riders. He's somebody who, I remember when we were at his house. He's got a very nice wife who's pretty glamorous, but very, very down to earth. And he was somebody who, because when you saw him in the Brexit negotiation, I think you saw somebody who was very protocol, very quite austere.
He looks very smart, doesn't he?
He's very. He's got smart white haircut. He's very well dressed, but very, very polite. Very polite. Even when he was dealing with the sort of, the shambles of some of the secretaries of state he had to deal with on Brexit. Very, very polite, very measured. The time I saw him really expressing a bit of passion was when he was showing me around his office and all these sort of, pictures on the wall and what have you. And the ones that he really, really, really clearly got emotional about were about when he won the Olympics for Albertville, which is the town in the Alps where he was born in the Alps, and he was put in charge of getting the Olympics.
Yeah.
So it was nice. I don't know if you watched the Paralympic closing ceremony, Rory. I expect you were busy. But Macron, who got booed slightly at the thing, but there right behind him in the shot was Barnier, who has suddenly gone from essentially being, somewhat in retirement to now being the prime minister. I think it's going to be a very, very tough job. I think whoever got that job, it was going to be difficult to do it for the long term. But I think the more I thought about it when he appointed him, I think he's got as good a chance as anyone of making it work because of the skills he's developed over a lifetime.
Two quick things. I mean, obviously, you're going to have to get us Gabriel Attal now to be interviewed on leading. So that's your task for the month.
Okay.
Second thing is, I don't get why Marine Le Pen would vote for him. I would have thought if you were Marine Le Pen on the far right in France, all your interests, because what you care about is being president next time round, is staying as far away from this shambles of a government as you possibly can. You don't want to be in the position of the Lib Dems and Nick Clegg of being a minority voting to support a government and then taking the blame for what they do.
Well, look, what Le Pen has always done is sort of play the long game quietly. She's not been making a big fuss through this whole thing. She's denied the Elysee. The Elysee gave the impression that she'd sort of signaled, we'll go with Barnier. She's denied having had any conversation about that at all. I think she'll enjoy the sense of being very, very powerful without actually having to do very much, and watch whilst the Macron government tries to get a budget through, and then she'll be sitting there hoping that it's a complete mess. It's interesting you mentioned Attal. I mean, Attal, I am sure now will go away and start to think about how he might make a pitch for the presidency at the next election, because he is widely considered to have done a pretty good job, and is actually in the polling in France, and they're obsessed with polls in France, but he's doing pretty well. So he may be he may end up coming out reasonably well from this, but we'll see. Tova Wang, what are the implications of Dick Cheney backing Kamala Harris?
Oh, well, I don't think Dick Cheney backing Kamala Harris, surprising though it is going to make very much difference to anyone, really. I don't think Dick Cheney has a big natural constituency left. His daughter, Liz Cheney, on the other hand, I think has been a courageous, outspoken, appealing voice to the Republican right. I'm more worried by Elon Musk endorsing Trump, because despite our views on Elon Musk, what, of course, you pick up very quickly on Twitter is he has a massive fan base, particularly of young men who believe that because he's the richest man in the world, he's the smartest man in the world, and like nothing more than sharing weird, fake, handwritten slides of 7 leadership lessons from Elon Musk. And Musk now saying he's going to reform government efficiency potentially gives permission for some of these kind of business types to be like, well, I'm not sure I really like Trump, but if he's bringing in Musk to sort out the efficiency of government. So I am a bit worried about that.
I mean, look, there's no doubt he's got a massive following. As we said last week, he sort of bombards Twitter with his own views. He can get attention for anything that he says or does. He posted a truly ridiculous picture of himself with these huge letters DOGE, Department of Government Efficiency. The only thing is, I think that you're probably right about Cheney, but I think that the fact that I don't know if you've seen that the latest campaign ad that the Harris campaign has put out is a collection of comments from. It's got Mike Pence. It's got Milley, the former head of the military. It's got the guy, the former defense secretary, who's done an interview on CNN saying that the nation's security is at risk with Trump. It's got John Bolton, Trump's security advisor. So they're running this line that the slogan is, the caption is, take it from the people who work for him. Donald Trump is a danger to our troops, our security, our democracy. There surely must be, it's not that long ago historically, that Bush and Cheney were in charge and had very, very big support. I mean, Cheney was the original neoconservative. He's like one of the guys on the staging from kind of Reaganism to Trump. So he can't be, surely he's not completely irrelevant.
Yeah, I suppose that's right. It's just, I suppose the question is really all comes down to these key swing voters. I've been talking to Democratic organizers here in the States over the last few days, and my goodness, we're getting into funny games. The amount of money going into targeting just 150,000 people who could decide this election.
Well, thank God for that.
So little of it, though, seems to be about policy. It's all the basic belief in US politics at the moment is that it's all about peer pressure. So in America, unlike in Britain, the information on whether or not you voted is public. So a lot of the communication now is about reaching out to people who you think are sympathetic towards you, and obviously avoiding the people you think might vote the other way, and trying to guilt trip them. Your neighbors voted, your friends voted. Why haven't you voted yet? And they can do that in the primaries. They can do that in postal votes, and obviously they'll do that on the final day. Just before we leave America, we did have a question from somebody asking about how the Electoral College works. This is Gillian Booth. Still can't get my head around how the American Electoral College works. Seems such a strange system compared to the Australian electoral system. Can you do for our less informed listeners, explanation, illuminate this for an old Aussie? In 48 of the states plus the District of Columbia, there's a winner-takes-all system, which means that if you get first past the post in a state, you get all the electors from that state coming in behind you. And the number of electors that each state has is roughly proportional to its population, but it favors the smaller states because you get a minimum number of electors in the smaller states. And the reason that this is absolutely vital, and the reason that the entire US election is coming down to 7 or probably more likely 3 or even 1 state, is that if you can narrowly squeak through with, even 10,000 votes in Pennsylvania, you can swing the whole thing. And the final thing to understand about the Electoral College is that in the very unlikely situation that you have, although not completely unlikely given where we are on the polls, that you have a tie in the Electoral College, it then goes through to Congress to determine who becomes president, which is where it will really matter who's got the votes in the House of Representatives. And
just to let people know that the numbers and the states that we'll all be talking about on the night. Pennsylvania is the one that everybody talks about as being the most key. That's got 19. Wisconsin 10, Michigan 15, North Carolina 16, Georgia 16, Nevada 6, Arizona 11. But I think Pennsylvania is going to be absolutely key. They are both sides are spending an absolute fortune. as you say. There's no, of all the money, I mean, Harris is out fundraising by a factor of almost 3-1 at the moment. But I'm pleased, Rory, if they're saying to you that they're putting all that money into small numbers of people and targeted advertising, because they have to do these big nationwide stuff, but ultimately there are so many places where everybody knows that what the result's going to be. As we talked to Frank Luntz about that on Leading recently, where he said, who's going to win California, who's going to win Alabama, and the rest. That's where you fight.
Alastair, question for you, Alex Crompson. Why is it that there is often such a large divergence between polls and betting markets? What does each tell us? For example, right now, many polls have Harris as pulling ahead, but the betting markets have Trump as the favorite, 53-46. Any thoughts on this? And maybe explain a bit to listeners how these betting markets work.
I'm not a big better, but I think that the betting markets are often more a reflection of where money is being placed. So that might be the fact that, somebody might want to manipulate the betting markets to get the odds changed, but also there may well be a lot of kind of people who bet on politics who just, who want Trump to win. There may be more. Betting is the big bettors. They are absolutely fixated upon the outcome. So when we were talking we interviewed Nate Silver recently, and that will be out on Leading soon. And he was making the point that in this election, it's going to be so close, he's not sure actually he's going to bet on it. Where the big bettors go, they will be putting huge sums of money on, often at very, 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 very small odds. Okay. But what I think the betting markets here are being driven by probably is a combination of the chatter, the polls, and where the bets are going. And people don't necessarily bet according to what the polls are saying. Does that make sense?
Got you. Here's a question that came to you from someone that you actually met called Casperi Lewis. Alastair, we met at ULCH a few weeks ago. We had a lovely chat about Timpson. So that's James Timpson, the Prisons Minister, Corbyn in the NHS and everything in between. My question is, would you be in support of some potentially means-tested fee for missed hospital appointments? It's disgraceful that, particularly when the NHS is on its knees, over 120 million appointments are missed every year. So let's say, Alastair, why wouldn't you support people being charged, I don't know, £5 or £10 for a missed appointment?
I mean, it is. I remember meeting this gentleman, and I also remember the chat. And the thing is, and that same day, the doctor that I was seeing was complaining to me about how many missed appointments they're having to deal with. And I was actually, because I probably wouldn't, I would try everything not to miss an appointment. But I was saying, actually, I found it incredible that I get a letter, I get an email, I get a text message, and I get a message on an app to remind me about my appointment. And quite often I've been getting phone calls to remind me of an appointment. And I kept saying to people, isn't this a sort of huge waste of money to have all this sort of these different ways to remind people they've got an appointment? And they were saying, well, it's because we've got so many missed appointments at the moment.
Well, so if we could charge
bloody rude.
If we could charge £10 per appointment, we'd be able to generate £1.2 billion a year off these missed appointments. So why not?
Yeah, but hold on a minute. How much do these systems cost to chase down £10 an appointment? I don't know.
How about, I don't know. And some countries obviously charge a minimal amount for an appointment of any sort in the first place, whether you miss it or not. And the idea, I suppose, is that if you charge people a little bit, they're more likely to value the appointment and they may be more likely to turn up. So even if it was a notional sum, like, I don't know, £5 or something.
I did wonder when...
I notice you're slightly avoiding this. Is this because you feel this is a massive political bomb and that if you supported any form of charging,
well, I don't think my view
would
would necessarily indicate anything about what Labour would do. I did notice Keir Starmer emphasising the importance of reform. Look, at some point, they may have to look at all sorts of different funding issues. I don't know. I, as a human being who basically supports the NHS and thinks that our doctors and nurses do an incredibly difficult job under massive stress, facing often quite a lot of sort of angry people, I just think that people should, if they have an appointment and they've agreed to that appointment, I'd like it to be easier to change the appointment. I quite often find it a real struggle to change an appointment. You get the text message, you get the letter, then trying to change it can be quite tricky. But I think on balance, I would. But I'd love to know how much it would cost and whether we'd have a system that would do it without actually ending up costing us even more. Now, Rory,
Yes.
This question is from somebody called Anthony Save the NHS.
Oh, good.
And if you're going to get questions from people who are directed at me, this one's very much for you. When Rory is on Radio 4, he uses a perfect received pronunciation accent. When he does the Rest is Politics podcast, he reverts to a mid-Atlantic twang, dropping end consonants. Is this him trying to appeal to American listeners? I've not noticed that, but I have noticed that when you're on Radio 4, you will say party.
Yeah.
But when I noticed this in Chicago, you will say puddy.
It's interesting, isn't it? Maybe it's to do with what happens naturally when I'm talking to Michel Hussein as opposed to talking to you. I guess she brings out my posh English accent somehow.
Oh, I see.
Yeah,
but I'm not.
She's got quite a posh English accent, is what I suppose I'm saying. Yeah,
but
maybe it's just I'm a weird sort of mimic of the other person. Well, I'm not obviously mimicking you, but maybe my mid-Atlantic twang is some sort of weird attempt to adjust to Alastair. I don't know.
Do you recognise Anthony Save the NHS's point?
I've been mocked for this for a long time.
Have you?
Yeah. People. I mean, it is also true. I'm married to an American.
Yeah.
My kids can literally change from a complete American accent to a complete British accent, depending on who they're talking to. Yeah.
But do you think when you're on the BBC, because he specifically mentioned Radio 4, do you think when you're on the BBC, it sort of speaks to something very British within you and you have to speak like a true Brit?
Yeah, it could be that. Could be that.
I have a thing when I'm in, my kids take the mickey out of it. When I'm with Scottish people, I get a very, very Scottish twang in my accent, which isn't there when I'm in England. So anyway,
I'm also so confused because I'm talking to you from the States and I'm married to an American. I now often no longer remember what the British or American pronunciation of something is.
Right.
Shoshana and I have these stupid conversations where we're both trying to work out how something's supposed to be pronounced. Dahir, hey Rory and Alastair, have you been following the recent tensions between Somalia and Ethiopia? What do you think about Egypt's involvement in the crisis? What are your thoughts? Over to you.
Well, this is another one that is sort of massively important, but doesn't seem to be getting that much attention at all. You've now got so essentially what's happened is that Ethiopia, landlocked since Eritrea moved off after a pretty brutal war that I covered back in the 80s, I think it was, becomes landlocked, wants access to the sea, does a deal with Somaliland, which does a 50-year lease on a naval base. But of course, Somaliland is a breakaway country, a breakaway territory from Somalia. The deal, in quotes, unspoken, partly spoken, is in exchange for getting the access to the sea and the ability to build a port. They basically are leasing 12 miles of coastline from Somaliland, that they will recognize Somaliland. Somalia, therefore, very, very, very unhappy, kick out the ambassador, shut down their consulates. And meanwhile, now Egypt, big power, big country, has decided to give them support. So thereby it's all getting a little bit tense.
And it gets even more complicated because all these other players, Qatar, UAE, Turkey, to name three, also back different provinces within Somalia.
Yeah.
And Somaliland itself, I mean, I visited Somaliland and Somalia, and Somaliland, in many ways, has been a success story. Been much more peaceful than the rest of Somalia, has done better in terms of its administration, in terms of holding elections, in terms of economic development. A lot of very prominent British Somalis are from Somaliland and are very sympathetic towards Britain recognizing Somaliland's independence, which which the world has tended to hold off from doing because they're very worried that Somalia is going to disintegrate further.
Yeah.
And this question of these policies around ports and roads all the way down the Horn of Africa is vital, because you've got China investing in ports, you've got UAE investing in ports, you've got other Gulf countries investing in ports, and as you say, Ethiopia, all of them trying to get access to that coastline. And in the case of Djibouti, I think they've managed to sell part of their port to the French, part to the Americans, part to the Chinese, and part to UAE.
I think it's Djibouti. Am I right to say I think Djibouti is the only place outside China where China now has a military base?
Right. It's certainly got a Chinese military base along with everybody else's military base as well.
Yeah, yeah. So anyway, this is so Egypt has now sent a couple of C-130 military airplanes to Mogadishu. They're planning to send 5,000 soldiers in the short term to support an African Union force. Somalia and Ethiopia, constant war of words at this about this, but it's I'd say it's quite tense. And Turkey, interesting how often Turkey sort of pops on these things. Turkey has been the one that's been trying to sort of broker some kind of calm down agreement. Carolina Merches, can you please speak about the recent situation in Venezuela and what the realistic chances are of the opposition between Edmundo Gonzalez and Maria Corina Machado restoring democracy, especially since Gonzalez has now taken asylum in Spain? Well, I fear that you've answered your own question there, Carolina.
Yeah, it's been a real blow. People were hopeful. Just to remind people, we covered the Venezuelan election in quite a lot of detail, but it's pretty clear that the opposition won the election and that Maduro effectively stole it. And there was hope coming off this that there would be a negotiated settlement, particularly led by people like Brazil. Lula in Brazil, slightly more sympathetic towards Maduro, was seen as a negotiator who might be able to get some sort of deal or coalition going between Maduro's government and the opposition. But this flight, after Gonzalez had taken refuge in the Argentinian embassy, with him now going to Spain, feels to people as though that's sadly the opposition giving up on that process and effectively Maduro being, at least for the time being, reinforced in power.
I mentioned in the main podcast the chat we had with Anne Applebaum, and the interesting observation she makes about Venezuela. So we assume, so you're there talking about Lula, and we'll talk about, the American reaction, the European Union reaction, whatever it might be. But she now talks about this as being like a network of countries where when an autocrat does something as brazen as this, comprehensively lose an election, refuse to release the data of the results, but just say that you've won it. But then support comes in all sorts of ways from the other autocrats and autocratic regimes of the world. So it must be unbelievably heartrending, frustrating to live in a country where you've, like Gonzalez, helped by Machado, you've won an election, and the end result is that you're being hunted down by the police security forces are going to do whatever they do to you, and you have to get on a plane and go and take asylum in Spain. It's absolutely horrific.
No, very sad. Final question from me. Georgie Maynard. ParalympicsGB have demonstrated overcoming challenges and achieving huge success in Paris. How have they achieved this notable success? And who, person, party, organisation, needs to learn the most from the team and their approach?
Well, I have been following the Paralympics quite closely. My son Callum makes films about Paralympics, and they won an Emmy last year for the first one, The Rising Phoenix, and they're in the middle of making another one now. And I've absolutely loved the Paralympics. GB they came second in the medals table behind China. China were way ahead of everybody, but to come second is pretty remarkable. 49 gold medals. I think 2012, London 2012, I think was a key moment. I think that was the first Paralympics where people saw full stadiums. They saw amazing achievement. The whole country got stuck in. I think we've got to give a big shout out to John Major's government I can't remember exactly what year. Was it 1993 when the National Lottery was formed?
Yeah.
And the National Lottery has been a huge funder. And I'll tell you what's been amazing. Virtually every medal winner who's done an interview has mentioned the National Lottery. Now,
that's great.
Well, when we talk about learning things, Roy, that says to me there is a spin doctor working for ParalympicsGB who is saying to them before they do every day, make sure you mention the lottery.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you where I think government can learn from this. Just think about it. Investing in the long term in good people to deliver clearly set objectives by giving them the support that they need. That is the lesson of the Paralympics, and I think it's been absolutely brilliant.
To be applied to the UK water sector.
And indeed to all sorts of other major challenges that we face.
And Alastair, let me ask you a final question. You've told us about your ketchup fear, but we've had a question coming in asking whether you have any particular phobias or fears. So apart from your famous fear of ketchup, are there any other things that you are rationally anxious about?
Well, I think my ketchup fear is entirely rational. I have a pathological fear of being late. I have recurring dreams about being stuck on escalators. So sometimes if I get on an escalator, I just get a little sort of sense of this escalator is going to stop and it's going to become a symbol of a stopped life. But apart from that, no, I'm very, very normal.
Yes, completely normal. Right. Great. I don't think I have really weird fears. The only time I've been aware of something powerful like that is when I was about 10 or 11, I went to stay with my friend Thomas Groetron, whose father worked in Strasbourg for the European Court of Human Rights. And I went onto the roof of the cathedral at Strasbourg, and I felt that I was being dragged to the edge. It's an incredibly powerful sense in the center that I was being sort of pulled off the edge of the cathedral roof. Well, yeah, so that was vertigo. And I haven't really had it since. And when I went back as a minister to Strasbourg, I went up onto the roof to see if it was still there. And it wasn't. I was able to stand on the roof fine. But as a child, yeah, that was my really powerful experience of vertigo, that sense that a magnet was dragging me off the edge of the roof.
Oh, Lord, that would be very nice. There we go. So me, it's ketchup, and you, it's vertigo. We're both very normal.
Very good. All right. Have a great weekend, Alastair. Bye-bye.